Hey everybody out there, I'm working on my crowdfunding campaign again. Just a little improvement there. €13 per day challenge. And I've spent today €11.09 for just vegetables and some tomato sauce and some noodles. So €11.09, €1.91 I can save if you don't spend anything anymore today. Working day. I was just preparing again the seminar at the University Graz. In yesterday's vlog, we had a really interesting discussion about real wages, about wages adjusted for inflation. And to sum this up, well, my conclusion was that it is really difficult to compare the past with the future or with the present, because obviously we're looking at a totally different world. So if we take those numbers of wages in the 1980s and compare them to today, we are comparing two totally different worlds. That's why those numbers are at least a little bit flawed, or at worst you cannot compare it at all. I mean, there's this favorite saying by Heraclit, who said something like, you cannot step into the same water again. Or better put, I have to read it, you cannot step twice into the same stream. Because you have changed and the stream, the river, has changed at the same time. So at the core of my yesterday's critique was somehow this idea that Pantarei, everything flows and is in constant movement, so it's very difficult to compare things. And that's the core of the difficulty when we are discussing inflation rates, real wages, economic policies. Because what is the idea when looking at real wages? The idea is that you want to compare how much did the standard of living improve for workers. Did they become more wealthy or less wealthy? Do you have to work more for the same amount of money? And it's not meant money, but goods you can buy actually. Do you have to work the same amount of time for the same goods, or do you have to work more, or do you have to work less? That's the question real wages want to ask. Because what does inflation mean? Inflation means, what is your money worth? Is it getting worthier or is it getting less worth? That's what the inflation rate at least wants to measure. And as I said yesterday, there's 770 goods you can buy, and you take those goods and you see how much do they cost this year and how much do they cost 1 year later. Have they gotten more expensive? Okay, we have inflation. Have they gotten less expensive? Okay, we have deflation. That's how it's measured. So you're measuring the value of money. That's at least what you try to do. And I want to say thank you to you guys who did comment on Facebook on this question. Really interesting discussion. At the beginning we were right on the topic. Later it came more a discussion about fairness and about self-employment. So it went a little bit off topic. But still, those were really interesting comments. One comment by Subversiv Active was, well, you have to look at the numbers, at the naked numbers, they are pure, you can't compare them. And for this I have to say, well, when you know, or if you know, that the inflation rate calculation is changed every 5 years. So every 5 years we have a different way it is adjusted, that those numbers are calculated. You know that this is not true that that the numbers are neutral. They are very often changed, and usually changed in a direction which is favorable for the economic policy which is at the moment at power. And what I found on the internet, and what I really found interesting and also enjoying, was the BicMac-Index. You might have heard of it. The BicMac-Index was to try to compare how much do you have to pay for a Big Mac, let's say in Austria, and how much do you have to pay in India. Or put differently, how long do you have to work in India to buy a Big Mac in average, and how long do you have to work in Austria? And then you could compare, because the Big Mac is comparable almost all over the world. I mean, I've read that in Australia there's less meat in it than in Canada, for example, so you also cannot compare it totally, but at least it's a standardized product. And now you can compare how long does a worker work in the 1980s to buy a Big Mac, and how long does he have to work now. So you have this Big Mac inflation rate, which might be a little bit more accurate than the state inflation rate. And then I found this statistic which compared the inflation rate which was presented by the government with the Big Mac inflation rate, and then they calculated the difference. And between 2000 and 2010, the highest difference was in Argentina. There were almost 9% difference in how much the Big Mac got more expensive than the official rate actually said. Brazil was very, very high. South Africa, United States was also quite high. Eurozone, about 1% difference. So you could compare the Big Mac inflation rate with the official inflation rate actually. In Russia and Indonesia was also a big difference. And that's maybe something you could calculate for yourself. Take a step back and think, okay, somebody in my position working in the same position as I'm working today with the same amount of hours, how many Big Macs could he afford in the 1980s, and how many Big Macs can he afford now? And still we have there, when you're comparing Big Macs, we are still having there this problem that you are not looking at all the other variables which are around the Big Mac. You are not looking at there are more people on this planet. You're not looking, there is the economy much more interconnected than back then. You're not looking at there is more fierce competition in the hamburger business with not only Big Mac but also Whopper and whatever. So that's the problem, one of the biggest problems of economic theory actually is ceteris paribus, which is a thought economists usually take, which means all other things being equal. So you take the Big Mac, look only at the Big Mac, and you think, okay, are all other things, they are staying equal? Which is, of course, not true. But that's what economists try to do. And that's how those distortions come up between real wages or inflation rates and your personal view on the world, where you think, oh, that's totally wrong what the government is saying. My view is totally different. To conclude, don't trust the numbers. Think about yourself, think about the past, and always try to differentiate between those things you're being told by the government or by Facebook and your friends, and the things you can really think about yourself and maybe try to find out. And yeah, it's not always black and white. I think that's what I wanted to say with this. Interesting discussion. Let me know in the comments as usual what you think about this.